Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Institute of Chinese Studies and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, I welcome you all to the ICS CAS conversation. Our discussion today will focus on the topic ensuring deterrence along the India-China line of actual control, the way ahead. Joining this conversation today are our distinguished panelists, Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda, former General Officer Commanding-in-Chief Northern Command, Lieutenant General Praveen Bakshi, former General Officer Commanding-in-Chief Eastern Command, and Air Marshal Anil Khosla, former Vice Chief of Air Staff and currently Distinguished Fellow at the United Services Institute. As you all are aware, General Hooda was a Northern Army commander during the Chumar standoff along the line of actual control with China in 2014 and the surgical strikes along the line of control with Pakistan in 2016. General Bakshi was the Eastern Army commander during the Doklam crisis in 2017. And Air Marshal Khosla was Air Officer Commanding Leh, Eastern Air Commander and Vice Chief of Air Staff, and handled air operations during the Doklam standoff with China and later the Balakot strikes in 2019. He has also worked extensively with the Army and the other agencies such as the National Technical Research Organization. Chairing the conversation this afternoon is Lieutenant General Dr. V.K. Ahluwalia, former General Officer Commanding-in-Chief, Central Command, and currently Director of the Center for Land Warfare Studies. General Ahluwalia commanded an infantry brigade in Uri Sector 2001-2002, Mountain Division in Kargil 2005-2006, and Corps in Leh Ladakh Sector 2008-2009. To give a brief outline of the program, the session will be for 1 hour and 30 minutes. The Chair, General V.K. Ahluwalia, will initiate the proceedings by offering the welcome remarks. This will be followed by remarks by our three speakers. Thereafter, the Chair will open the floor for questions. We will then conclude the session with concluding remarks by the Chair and vote of thanks by Mr. Peter Remelli, Resident Representative to India, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Participants are requested to remain muted throughout the event. To pose questions, you may send in your questions via the chat box or use the raise hand option. Please unmute yourself only when called upon to do so by the Chair. I will now invite the Chair to begin the proceedings. Over to you, sir. Okay, so now I think we'll have to begin with the speakers. Sorry for the technical issues that we are facing. So I'll now invite General Hooda to begin the proceedings.
So thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. And thank you for inviting me to this ICS webinar. So in my opening remarks, I'll just make two quick observations and then make some recommendations. The first observation that I have is, when we look ahead, what is going to be the likely situation along the line of actual control? And I want to classify it by two words. The first is the situation is going to be uncertain, and the second is the situation is going to be tense. Why do I say it's going to be uncertain? Despite some popular sort of belief that the LAC is something that is not understood by either side, let me just clarify and say that as far as the two militaries were concerned, there was a fairly clear mutual understanding about the alignment of the LAC and where it lay. So we knew that there are some disputed areas, and we knew exactly where those disputed areas lay. We also were clear about areas where there was absolutely no dispute, and both sides patrolled up to what their perception of the LAC was. Let me explain this in the context of Ladakh, because I think that's one place where the geography is fairly well understood by everybody now with, with whatever standoff has taken place. So, for example, in Ladakh, Depsang Plains was a disputed area where both sides, would want to patrol up to their perception of the LAC, and the perception of the LAC varied. Similarly, for example, the north bank of Pengongso was a disputed area. So where our perception was that the LAC lies at finger 8, and the Chinese perception was that the LAC lay at finger 4. But there were also the majority of the LAC along in Ladakh. There was absolutely no dispute. We were patrolling up to our perceptions, and the Chinese understood where it is, and they didn't cross it. And similarly, we were aware of where the Chinese perception is. They would patrol up to that area. We wouldn't cross that point. I think this mutual understanding has completely broken down. And I say this because if you see, the Chinese have intruded in areas like Galwan, in the areas of Hot Spring, in the areas of Gogra, where there was absolutely no dispute at all. And what this has resulted in is, somewhat like the the complete LAC is now fair game. There is no understanding between the two sides, and so what we are going to see is greater suspicion, greater mistrust along the LAC. You will see greater deployment of troops. Uh, the deployment of troops in areas where there was no dispute was thinner as opposed to areas which were disputed. Now you will see much greater deployment along the LAC. You will also see much more aggressive reactions to activities by both sides along the LAC. And primarily with the feeling that either side could cross the LAC and do something. Combine this with the fact that today there is complete disregard for all confidence building measures. So it was these confidence building measures and protocols that held peace along the LAC. Those again have completely broken down. And so I'm not saying that the LAC is going to become like the line of control and firing exchanges, etc., are going to happen. But I think our feeling of the past that the LAC is calm, there hasn't been a shot fired in anger. I think all those kind of uh, that understanding along the LAC is going to break down. So you're going to see an uncertain and a tense LAC in the future. The second observation I want to make is about the military capability gap between India and China. And it's clear that this capability gap is growing and is likely to grow even in the much more in the future. So along the LAC, there was a little disadvantage with the Indian Army, and that was primarily because there was a mismatch in infrastructure on both sides of the border. Infrastructure development was much better on the Chinese side, and therefore their ability to mobilize, to move, to come into some of these disputed areas was much more than what the Indian Army had. But we did have some advantages as far as the Air Force and the Navy is concerned. The Air Force primarily because the fact that the PLA Air Force was forced to operate from high altitude airfields in Tibet, and that had its own sort of limitations. And similarly, the Navy had a huge geographical advantage in the Indian Ocean. I'm afraid this advantage is also shrinking now, and in the next decade could completely disappear. Let's look at the Navy. Uh, Today, the PLA Navy is the largest Navy in terms of numbers. I mean, it's also surpassed the United States, although in terms of tonnage, the US Navy still, because of its aircraft carrier, is higher. But purely in terms of numbers, today, the PLA Navy is the largest Navy. It has an extremely impressive shipbuilding capability. Just to give you an example, in 2016, the PLA Navy commissioned 18 ships. In the same period, the Indian Navy commissioned 3. And the PLA Navy thereafter has been commissioning 12 to 14 ships a year compared to 3 to 4 as far as the Indian Navy is concerned. So as we go into the future, I think you are going to see greater presence of the PLA Navy in the Indian Ocean. Even as far as the Air Force is concerned, today, the PLA Air Force has 2,000 combat aircraft. It's assessed that in the next few years, majority of their fighters are going to be fourth generation force. Uh, they've put up some very impressive air defense systems, surface to air missiles. Rocket Force is inducting sophisticated long range and medium range surface to surface missiles, hypersonic missiles. The UAV fleet is very impressive. They're also investing very heavily, and I'm comparing it to the Indian military in areas like cyber, in areas like space, electronic warfare. Their induction of technology in the PLA military is good, and is backed up by what they call the military civilian fusion strategy. where dual-use high-end technologies are being inducted. So, all in all, I think the PLA has done some very impressive reforms and modernization in recent years. And when we are looking at the Indian military and the PLA, the capability gap is going to grow unless we do something. And I have some recommendations. So based on these two observations, I make some few brief recommendations, and these are primarily to do with the continental domain. And I think the first place we need to invest very heavily is in our infrastructure development. There was a feeling that operations in the winter are not going to be possible, and we know at least in Ladakh that that myth has been busted. Both the armies have done the standoff through the winters. Not only that, if you look at actually the PLA military exercises in the last 4 years in Tibet, opposite Ladakh, these exercises have all been carried out in the months of January, February, during peak winter months. And what happens to us in Ladakh is it's completely cut off for 5 to 6 months in a year because we still don't have all weather roads coming into Ladakh. Even in the areas, for example, in Arunachal Pradesh, there is a shortfall. We still don't have roads which are going up to the LAC. So I think the first thing we need to do is infrastructure development. The second thing that the Indian Army needs to look at very seriously is this whole discussion on boots on the ground versus capability building. With what has happened along the LAC, I think what we are going to see, is an attempt to put more and more boots on the ground. We are already seeing alignment of one strike corps towards the northern border. And while some additional boots are certainly required, I think we need to be careful about whether that's the best strategy to follow. Because as it is, the army has a very stressed, sort of budget. Revenue takes more than 80% of expenditure, and if you're going to put more and more boots on the ground, then your revenue budget is going to balloon. So we need to start thinking about what sort of capabilities are required. Third thing is rethinking our strategy on how we need to deal with this future tension with China. Uh, Obviously, we understand that it may not translate into an all-out war, but I do think there is a need to see how we can deter China from doing what it is doing. What are the kind of capabilities that are required for effective deterrence? What are the capabilities required for future war fighting with China? And that's a debate, I think, both a doctrinal debate and a capability building debate that we need to now indulge in very seriously. And my final point is, while we do all these preparations, I think we need to quickly start looking at putting new confidence building measures in place. The old ones have completely failed now. And obviously, it's not in the interest of both sides to have a completely tense kind of border situation with the likelihood of local incidents, spiraling out of control. So I think at the diplomatic and military level, we need to, as we continue to discuss, the ongoing standoff, which is not completely resolved till now, I think quickly also start looking at new confidence building measures to be put in place. So these are my sort of brief observations and recommendations, and I will end here. And if there are any questions, we can take it in the later session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Hooda. We seem to have got General Ahluwalia back online. So I would now like to invite General Ahluwalia to conduct the proceedings. All right. So now I would like to invite the next speaker, Lieutenant General Praveen Bakshi, to give his remarks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm audible. Is anyone can give a thumbs up? Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be invited by CS and KS combined for this webinar. And as some of you, the more discerning amongst you may have noticed that in my, not only have I shed my uniform, hopefully along with it also my inhibitions. If you see my DP profile, which was put out, I was the only armed forces guy in civis. And this is so that we can converse with more candidly, with the professional maturity, and of course, within the limits of candor. The moot point of today's discussion is to decipher what are we up against? Did we get our challenges wrong? Did we get our capabilities development wrong? Did we get both wrong? Why is it that whenever a strategic challenge is, India is faced with a strategic challenge, our response options are narrowing as time goes by? We need to pause and reflect. What's the root cause of this? Why are we scurrying around for options when the options should have been readily available? Now, let's try and see or peep into this. Now, to my mind, we are firmly in the midst of a gray zone conflict, a full-blown gray zone conflict, where, to my mind, talking about gray zone, China and Pakistan, I will put them on the same canvas. And that's the challenge which we have. Now, this learned audience fully understands the gray zone conflict. It's a large-scale, tactical actions, seemingly unconnected, but connected, persistent over a period of time, refining, transforming as you move along, and you build in alter historical narratives, everything which China has been doing. And I think India has failed to recognize that we were in a gray zone conflict a decade or two ago, or maybe more. And we never really institutionally worked out our concepts, our doctrines to tackle this challenge. And that is why what has happened today, gray zone conflicts, as we all understand, do not rely on kinetic and contact warfare. In fact, they try and avoid it and yet attain the political objectives. However, China almost did it, whether it was in Doklam or it was in Eastern Ladakh. Where they went wrong, to my mind, was they flagged the red lines of India incorrectly. They did not factor in the strong resolve India will show that so much and no more. And to that extent, perhaps they have taken a strategic pause, but they will be unrelenting in their quest for whatever their political objectives are. Now, having said that, what should we be doing? We should be consciously moving away with our kinetic and contact-centric conflict doctrine to a more nuanced strategic response for this kind of conflict. And I'll explain the reason why. We need to look at deterrence by denial and also by punishment. Punishment is the last resource. Eventually, combat capabilities, kinetic capabilities cannot be wished away, even in the gray zone conflict. But having said that, we should try and avoid putting them to use. We should use it more as a deterrence. Ironically, we have not fully recognized this part and only looked at the contact, force and force options. Even in Eastern Ladakh, what did we do? What we are best at? We moved our formations, force on force, and tried to deter them. Whether we have succeeded, history will tell, because just getting back from Pagongso is not even half the battle won, as far as we are concerned. The more important Depsang plains closer to Karakoram are still threatened by China. And that was what is my considered opinion, even when I was in service, that when you look at the landscape of our complete LAC with China, and you break it into the Northeast and the northern areas, the Northeast has relative less strategic importance for China as compared to the northern areas, that is Eastern Ladakh. And a pattern was emerging from 2013, 14, 15, 17. And that is where we should have recognized it and ramped up our deterrence capabilities. But then gray zone is not only about military force. or deterrence thereof. It's a whole of nation response capability. And here I am afraid we have fallen woefully short. China has moved by leaps and bounds ahead of us in this overall game of gray zone conflict. Now, I'd like to quote Dr. Michael J. Mazar, who has laid out a few hypotheses of gray zone conflict, and let's relate it to what's happening in Eastern Ladakh. The first hypothesis, Michael states, is that gray zone campaigns will constitute the default mode of conflict in the coming decades. Are we preparing for that? Or are we still looking at conventional, subconventional, proxy conflicts, limited, sectoral, kinetic, contact stages? Second hypothesis is that the gray zone strategy demands a new theory of conflict. Now we got to ask ourselves, did we transform? Did we doctrinally, conceptually, strategically transform to take on this new type of conflict? What is this new type of conflict? The gray zone. The major purpose is to ensure that your adversary has lost prior to real contact or conflict or contact warfare. This is by dominating the political situation. You're looking at the social diaspora. You're diminishing his ability to ratchet up support from coalitions. You're weakening his logistic base. You are fracturing him. Have we really built deterrences against all these? The third is gray zone campaigns generate a sense of persistent warfare. And General Hooda rightly said, we are in it for a long haul. We better be ready for it for a long haul. The next part is, the downside is the gray zone conflict does increase the potential of a real conflict. And to that extent, we need to keep our war waging capability intact. More importantly, gray zone warfare also tends to undermine deterrence itself. So whatever deterrence you have, whether it's strategic deterrence, conventional deterrence, it tends to circumvent it, outmaneuver it. So that's what I feel on gray zone conflict. India seems largely ill-prepared. Now, what do we need to do about it? First and foremost, we need to get our apex of our security architecture right. Unfortunately, to my nascent understanding, it's labyrinth. There are too many cogs. There is no one real one calling the shots. The political dispensation, whether it's the RM, the Prime Minister, we have the NSA, who's out of the ambit of our constitutional framework. We have the three chiefs. We are moving towards theaterization. We need to get that apex security architecture right, that whole of nations approach to this threat. We need to get it right, which I'm afraid has not. And then, having got it right, we need to get our strategy, our doctrine against this kind of conflict right. We need to build technological capabilities, and we require quality and not quantity. I fully agree with General Hooda. Numbers are not going to be deterrent by themselves. We need quantum leaps in our technology. We need to decide the red lines which India has and let them be known to our adversaries. You cross that red line, we will react more vigorously than perhaps what you have factored in. Gray zone warfare premises itself on one more important factor. The more toxic the social and political environment there is, the greater the vulnerability of a nation. We need to introspect. Are we taking enough measures to keep our social cohesion intact? And of course, we'll come to future conflicts now. Pagongso, to my mind, was a red herring. Nakula, on the other extreme, was a red herring. Eventually, China has a larger aim. So what do we do? I think a recent article in the Tribune, and I'll sign off after this. The recent article in Tribune, I think yesterday's Tribune, was quite telling. I think it was by Pune International Center. Most of you must have read that editorial. It talks of strategic patience and flexible policies by Dr. Ganesh Natarajan and Ajit Ranade, but actually there were 5-6 co-authors, Ambassador Gautam Bambewala and many others. What are they really talking about? After analyzing everything, they come to the conclusion we need a clear short-term perspective, how to tackle the quagmire we find ourselves in, and we need a long-term perspective. In the short term, given the fact that we are vastly outstripped by China in almost all parameters, we have no option but to look at coalitions, alliances, whether formalized or informal. We have no option. We can't go it alone. But I would caveat it with one observation. If we think any coalition is going to get boots on ground to the continental shelf, to our land borders, we will be getting it wrong. That would not be a correct premise. The second part is long-term perspective. We need to make our nation strong. We need to economically become strong, technologically become strong, become self-reliant, try and narrow the gap whilst keeping, so there'll be a transition from the short term to the long term. And that is not going to come easily. But we have the required strategic levers in our favor. More about it in the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, General Bakshi. Now I would like to invite our next speaker, Air Marshal Anil Khosla, to give his remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, ICS and KS, for inviting me on giving my views on a very, very vital subject. And I'm honored that I'm with such a distinguished panel of speakers. I always request all the webinar organizers that please let me speak before General Bakshi, because he always steals the thunder from me. But I think seniority counts. And today, I think General Hooda and General Bakshi have covered most of the points which I wanted to cover. So anyway, I will make an attempt to address the topic. I think very, very relevant topic, that 8 months of staring into each other's eyes without blinking. What next? What we need to introspect and find a way ahead. I will stick to the cover note which was circulated, the issues which were in that, and try and give my recommendations in brief. And like General Bakshi said, having shed the uniform, I will maybe get out of a comfort zone of military analysis and step into a little bit into non-military realm also. And all this under the, while covering how does the Chinese brain work in bits and pieces here and there. So as far as the first issue is concerned about the LAC and the LOC, LOC going the LAC way, enough has been said by the two speakers, and they are rightly so, because they have been on ground. I've been seeing this only from the air, which is only demarcated on the map. And only when generals invited me to at the forward post, then only I went and saw those. Anyway, before I cover the LAC issue, the Chinese few traits are, I will just like to tag, these are for Chinese, ends matter, the means don't. And opportunism is the in thing. Mao had articulated it very well. I will quote it later maybe. And Xi has shown it, that opportunism is the done thing. As far as Chinese are concerned, treachery, deceit, deception, these are normal things to be used and done. Treaties, norm, morality, friendship, these are all non-existent words. And treaties and all are only to buy time and twist them according to their convenience. As far as India is concerned, somebody coined a very well short term as far as Chinese policy towards India of 3 E's: encirclement, entanglement, and ensnarement. I think very aptly put. So what happens to LAC now? In my opinion, they are unlikely to delineate it or demarcate in future. Entanglement suits them very well. It suits their purpose. I have a pressure cooker theory, which I'll maybe cover later if time permits. And I think Chinese will do what they've done in Doklam, they've done now in Galwan, and time and again, and they will continue doing it in future as well, in place of their choosing and the time of their choosing. The treaties, CBMs, I differ a little bit from General Hooda. Enough treaties and CBMs are existing, and every time a occurrence happens, we add some clauses to it. But what is the point of these treaties if the opponent is not ready to adhere to them or ignores them at will? So it is question of, if both parties are agreeing to adhere to it all the time, then only it is worth having them. So what happens now? The trust has been broken. So what do? We should shed our complacency. And as far as LAC is concerned, we need to watch the entire LAC. As far as in the east, that McMahon line, whatever borders, whatever adjacent areas we have, we need to watch out for them. Easier said than done. So we can't have boots on ground like both the generals said. We can't afford it. We can't have it. The terrain is very hostile. The weather is hostile, and we can't afford it in any case. So the next best option is ISR capabilities we need to enhance. So I will keep covering what all we need to do. And I feel that space-based ISR capability at the moment is the best option, costly, but we need to get into it. We need to make a detailed border plan. We need to review it time to time, including areas where they're likely to do these sort of things and the times when they're likely to do it, and keep a special watch on this. We need to maintain our troops and equipment in some rear bases, maybe more acclimatized troops, and jointly within the Air Force and the Army have a plan for a speedy mobilization as we did now. Okay, now coming to two more aspects as far as they're not directly related to LAC management, but are important to my mind. One is Chinese are expert at demography change. They've shown it in Tibet, they've shown it in Xinjiang province, Nepal, Bhutan, whatever border areas, even Arunachal, this village which they've made. I think we need to be careful and watch out about these things. Maybe we need to have a border development plan of our own, not only infrastructure, but include demography as well. The second is not directly related to even demography, and that is the water warfare. I think I need to tag that here. In Doklam times, General Bakshi will recall, there was sudden flooding in 2017. They said that is because of the earthquake. Then 2018, there were blackening of the water which was coming across in the river. They said that is because of earthquake. So now in their 14th plan, 5-year plan, and also their long-term plan for 2035, they have announced making a biggest world dam in the world, even bigger than the Three Gorges Dam, almost 3 times this capacity, and several smaller ones. I think Chinese are capable of turning anything into a weapon. And this water bomb, we need to be a bit careful about. Then second issue, which was covered in the cover note, was what are the Chinese military capabilities we need to take cognizance of? Both the generals have covered it to quite a bit. Chinese military modernization plan is a very scientific progression in addressing all the 4 verticals, that is equipment, technology, tactics and doctrine, organizational changes, HR and training. And they're moving fast. They're achieving their timelines ahead of the stipulated times. So we need to be careful. Okay, cyber and space, I will not cover, enough has been said about it. Nuclear, I will like to tag. They are refusing the Chinese to join any of the treaties along with USA or Russia or UN sponsored on the pretext that we are a smaller force. And to my mind, they're buying time so that they come at parity with USA and Russia and then talk across the table from the position of equal strength. As far as military capability is concerned, I would like to tag 3 things. One is the CBRN, long-range vectors, and swarm and drone technology combined. Why combined, I'll tell you subsequently. As far as CBRN biological, the term has been coined as Pearl Harbor, biological Pearl Harbor. And I think this Wuhan virus has created a lot of questions. I'll not go into details. Long-range vectors we are fully aware of. And swarm and drone industry in China is really growing fast. I've seen it firsthand during Zhuhai Air Show, and they are big into it. They are going into now suicide drones, and which can loiter around, sort of a loiter munition. They're filling the gap between the artillery shells and the long-range vectors and the conventional weapons, where these drones can loiter around and destroy the targets. Why I said all these 3 together is because the USA did a war gaming in which they found that they come to conclusion, and it's a no rocket science, that initially the disruption will be caused by biological warfare and the cyber activities. And in the position of the chaos, the opening salvo of force application will be by the long-range vectors and drones. And thereafter, when the total chaos is created, maybe the conventional vectors may come in. So what does it mean to us militarily? Our air defense task has grown in the spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, we have these small drones. We need to have close-in weapon systems to neutralize them. On the other end of the spectrum, we need long-range missiles, 6,000 kilometers and all, maybe hypersonic. So what do we need? We need the BMD capability. And in between comes the conventional platforms. So, or we need systems like S-400, which can address the multiple threats as far as AD is concerned. That is the repercussion on our AD. I think I will speak a little bit about Navy also. I was very glad to hear General Hooda talking about Navy. I've spent a lot of time with Navy and Army as well. General Hooda rightly said we need to be careful about the Navy expansion. The aircraft carrier program is a big success. They are already looking for a lighter aircraft. They're already looking for a carrier-based AWC aircraft. They're looking into a lot of anti-shipping missiles. Their numerical strength is already at par or surpassed USA. They are showing their presence in Indian Ocean from 1-0 in 2019 port visits. So they're going to 20 per year. So what does all this mean? In my opinion, they are aiming for a 6 battle group, aircraft carrier battle group by another 15 to 20 years. And they're looking at 2 fleets, one for the Pacific and one for the Indian Ocean. So what does it mean to us? We have a very good strategically located Andaman Nicobar Command, which can be an iron curtain. We need to make this iron curtain into a steel curtain. We need to fortify ourselves. A similar structure maybe in the Western Islands. So that is as far as sea is concerned. Now dealing with Dragon, a lot of issues have been covered. His mind, Dragon's mind, why his works is he respects strength. Whereas he sees any weakness, he tramples on. All engagements in the world by Dragon is for the benefit. The world is now looking through it. He has no friends, only interests. His classification of the other country is only 2. Either you are a enemy or you're a subordinate. There's no other classification. He is comfortable with bilateral engagements rather than multilateral because he can impose his issues more better than bilateral. His weaknesses include 3 Ts, as we said earlier, trade, Taiwan, and Tibet. But now I think more and more can be added: Hong Kong, Xinjiang, human rights, economy, South China Sea, and the works. Hunger for energy and natural resources. That is another trait. Okay, so as I said, we do not trust the Dragon at all in our future engagements. And we need to have a full all of government approach, as General Bakshi has said. It is not only militarily, it is diplomatic, political, economically, every way, and multi-domain, of course, in all possible domains. Other thing is, when eye to eye, the game is do not blink. Beware of his 2 steps or 3 steps forward and 1 step back. I have a theory he takes 1 or 2 steps sideways also to confuse the issue. So we need to watch out for that. General very rightly said we should have an open mind to collective security. At the moment we are making utterances that it's not a military alliance, it's only a military cooperation, but we should have our mind open. And maybe he's a little bit concerned about Quad becoming pentad or hexad or septad or octad, whatever you want to call it, with more and more countries or powerful countries joining in. 2 more issues I will tag upon here is, one is, I will not go into details. One is the nuclear part. I think we should have although we have been having a very mature approach towards nuclear and we're not been saber rattling and all, but once in a while, I think we should keep our mind open into going into that domain and making some little bit of a noise or something. And red lines, very rightly said, although China has an art of blurring the red lines and working underneath, but I think red lines we need to have and promulgate properly. Okay, last part, I'll cover a few more issues. One is China believes in no contact warfare, second artillery, drones. There are a lot of reasons for it. One reason is he's very averse to body bags. You've seen it. He's not even acknowledging his losses. So that is the way he is going about it. Long range vectors, drones. So this is one area where we need to look into. His weaknesses are still that some of the technology is lagging, like for example, jet engines as far as the aircraft industry is concerned. His tactics mainly are borrowed and he lacks a little bit of combat experience. But all these issues he's addressing slowly and he's catching up or moving ahead. What do we need to do? Rightly said, we need to invest in technology. Okay, in a big way. We need to have a science and technology strategy supported by monetary support. Robotics, quantum, hypersonics, AI. In some of these fields, even he is ahead of USA. USA is trying to catch up as far as AI is concerned. Swarm and drones, loyal wingman concept, where a piloted platform leads a whole lot of unpiloted platforms along with him. I call it Mother Goose concept. Whole world is working towards it. China is going big way into it. Infrastructure was touched upon by both the generals. I fully agree with it. At the moment, we heard CDS saying a few days back that in 3 to 4 years, we'll catch up as far as infrastructure on the borders is concerned. Well, China is moving ahead. He addressed the reach part of the infrastructure. Now he is going into speed part of the infrastructure. That means on the same infrastructure to enhance it, to make it faster. So that is where he's at. He's going to move forward. So we need to have a lot of infrastructure as far as Air Force is concerned in the northern sector as well as the eastern sector. Eastern sector is absolutely bare. We need to have a lot of infrastructure requirement and money is required for that. We need to go underground. That is the bottom line in a lot of issues. I have touched upon many things, but I have not gone into details, knowing that the audience is very learned. And last point is, I think we should learn something good from China. One is this MCF concept, which General Hooda had mentioned. I've studied it in a bit of a detail under 6 verticals. It's going in a very scientific way, including the industrial base, technology base, as far as expertise is concerned, infrastructure is concerned, logistics is concerned, mobilization is concerned. I think we have piecemeal all these things, but we need to have a top-down approach in a very, very formulated and integrated way. So bottom line to my mind is that it's not only numerical strength. I again reiterate, like the general said, we need to have a technical infusion into our military and we need to have indigenous industry. That is the way forward for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marshal Khosla. I think General Ahluwalia seems to have joined us again. So would you like to come in next and share some remarks?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, you're audible. Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I must apologize. The other day, I was speaking to the High Command wing at Mao, and the subject was challenges in VUCA environment, challenges in volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment. It's not going to happen in war alone. It can happen during a peacetime, as we are in Delhi itself. So I must apologize for the technical glitch, but let me just say a few things. You have heard 3 eminent speakers, and they covered a very vast canvas on a different sphere, and that is, can you see me now? Hey, Marshal Anil?
So your video is off, but you're audible.
Yeah. So first of all, let me begin with what is deterrence and what is the functions of the deterrence. First of all, deterrence is a function of 3 important factors. 1 is the capability, 2 is resolve, and 3rd is communication. When I talk about capability, if a nation does not have the wherewithal, in this case, we're talking about the hard power, the soft power, and the demonstrated power, then obviously the nation actually suffers a loss of credibility at the international and regional arena. Therefore, capability is the first requirement to ensure that you can exhibit your deterrence. Second is the resolve. Most important cornerstone of deterrence is resolve. A country's resolve to take actions. Have we really displayed the resolve? I must say, in context with China, look at Sundar Rangchu in 1986-87. I think we did the right thing to stand up to China and to ensure that whatever that happened in Sundar Rangchu in 1986-87, we did a good job. Not only was that, in 1967 and Nathula again, And when again you look at Dokulam, and now finally, when you talk of Eastern Ladakh. But before that, also I'd like to make a mention about the third point, that is the communication. It is so very important to communicate to the opponent of the red lines or the threshold if he crosses, that we have the capability and the resolve to take action. So these are three very important aspects which we need to keep in mind. Coming now to Eastern Ladakh, a lot has been already said since I commanded the corps in Leh, Ladakh, in the year 2008-9. Even at that point of time, we used to have this kind of standoffs. And let me say 4 very important points of the Indian Armed Forces. China was shocked and surprised with 4 actions that we have taken after 5th May border standoff. First one was the robust mobilization and deployment of our armed forces, Army and the Air Force in particular. He was surprised. Second, at the most opportune moment, we went in to occupy the strategic heights to south of Begongso in the Chushul subsector on the Kailash range, as also a few heights to the north of Begongso, which gave us a leverage to have with China. Third, India continued to develop its infrastructure despite objections being raised by China on our own side of the LAC. And fourth is the most important portion. The positive role played by all elements of national power, be it political, economic, trade, investment, information, technology, including banning of Chinese apps. The Chinese did not expect this, that we would take that kind of an action. And therefore, I think it is important that we keep these 3 important factors in mind, whether we really have been able to convey our capabilities, resolve, and the communication. I really had a question to ask in my opening address, that the subject that has been given out is talking about deterrence in the LAC environment and the way forward. Frankly speaking, we should really not be looking only at the continental areas, as we need to look at the entire South Asia as a subcontinent. You're quite aware that South Asia is one of the most volatile and unstable regions of the world. In fact, Institute for Economics and Peace, a Sydney-based organization, has continued to rank South Asia as the second least peaceful region of the world, Middle East and North Africa being the least peaceful. It is also the epicenter of terrorism, as also this region has a territorial compounded dispute, India and China, India and Pakistan. And all the 3 countries are nuclear armed states. And second issue is with the economic center of gravity shifting from west to the east, that is to Asia, you find that there's a great power competition being experienced in this region with a view to exert influence, with a view to get space, influence, and power. I think we need to be careful about that. And third, I want to make a mention about the Chinese designs in South China Sea, Indian Ocean region, and the kind. Actually, China has been increasingly shaping the geopolitics of the region, starting from South China Sea to the Indian Ocean, where they made a, shall I say, great amount of presence from 2008 onwards, as also from Iran to Central Asian Republic. So this is something that we need to keep in mind and not only talk about the continental area or the LAC. And I would like to ask a very important point. When you're talking about what are the kind of threats that we think that we should be concerned about, I think one of the very important portion, other than what actually has been said by the eminent speakers, is military-civil fusion, the latest kind of a concept in which they integrate all elements of civil to support the military organizations. But this is something that we have to be careful about, as also the 2 important elements that we need to consider. One is the force capability of China, and 2, more important, is the intention. Even in this particular case of what happened in May last year, the Chinese PLA 4th Motorized Division and the 6th Mechanized Division were carrying out high altitude training exercises in the general area of Bhutan and the adjoining areas. At what point of time a person or a country intention change is something very difficult. Therefore, one of the very important aspects brought out by the other speakers also has been our weakness in our ISR capabilities, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. This is one area I think all the 3 speakers have made a mention about. that we need to really focus on those. As also the fact, how do you fight force and force? You need to consider what is the kind of force that we actually have which will make some kind of a difference. Let me give you an example. We need to look at the sons of the soil concept, Ladakh Scouts, Kumaons, Dogras, Gadwalis, Arunachal Pradesh Scouts, Sikkim Scouts. They are some of those who actually are absolutely adept to take on a much larger force. The other question that I really actually had for the panelists to answer, which may get, I would like one of the panelists to answer is, what qualifies credible deterrence in the conventional context? Although the questionnaire given by ICS has been to say how can India rebuild CBMs and ensure credible deterrence against China, that appears to be a question primarily toward the strategic assets. But my point is, what qualifies to be a credible deterrence in conventional context? That is one aspect which we need to consider. Second aspect is, can infrastructure development, which China is indulging in big way in Tibet? In fact, some of us may have read an article by Claude RP just about yesterday as to how China is developing infrastructure and military capabilities in Tibet. So therefore, my question really remains, can infrastructure development and strategic assets also be the drivers of deterrence? For example, the China-Pakistan economic corridor is a strategic asset. I'm not talking about nuclear aspect at all. I'm talking about strategic assets like CPEC. Can that also be a driver? And similarly, if we build up infrastructure on our side of providing last mile connectivities in the areas that we consider important, do you think those could be the drivers for deterrence as well? Thirdly, active defense, what China really follows. Actually, it has a very major element of preemption. Isn't there a case for us to now consider, as General Hooda also brought out, that there's a need for us to look at our doctrines, look at our strategy, I would add, including war-fighting concepts, so that we are able to face those challenges. Is there a need for us to move on from a defensive to offensive defensive capabilities and in our doctrines? So with that, I think it'll be correct to now take on some questions from the participants, and we will try and answer those. Can we have the questions being raised for anyone?
We have quite a lot of questions coming in the chat box.
Yeah.
And we have 2 raised hands.
You can
so
first
Ambassador
read
Saurabh Kumar, we can take a couple of questions, 2 at a time. Ambassador Saurabh Kumar, do you want to raise a question?
Yeah, I don't have the facility at the moment because I'm working on a mobile. So I think you just read out 2 questions. We'll take 2 questions at a time.
Yeah. Ambassador Saurabh Kumar, you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
All the panelists for the presentations. I hope a critical remark. You see,
Speak up, please.
We are laboring over the.
I can't hear you. Ambassador, we are not able to hear you.
I'm sorry. Is it better now?
Can you please speak?
Is it better now?
Yes.
Is it better now? I'm closer to the mic.
Yes, it is better now. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Apart from thanking the panelists, I wanted to make an observation, which I hope will not be taken amiss. That all these things are unexceptional. Who would dispute? So we seem to be telling each other, in general, as a whole, the strategic community, what should be pretty obvious and taken for granted. So all our weaknesses we have highlighted, and all those who will be listening to this presentation, those across the border included, will be wiser about them. We have to strategize in private. We can't strategize in public, and that should be done. In public, we can our understanding of Chinese intentions, our understanding of the Chinese game plan. So I would have liked to see more of that. I'm sorry to be critical, but I would like to heard more of that rather than an elaboration of our weaknesses, which we can almost guess as laymen, even if we don't know. How does it help to bring them out? So thank you very much, and please take them in the spirit in which they are offered.
Frankly, Ambassador, I really couldn't get your question because there was a little distortion in your voice. But if any of the panelists who has heard the question would like to answer, then Hooda?
No, so it wasn't a question, sir. It was an observation that he was making. So if you didn't hear it, his observation was that, in a public discussion like this, we should not be bringing out our weaknesses because there are people who are listening on. So we should not talk so much about our weaknesses, but about what our future strategy should be. So that's the point that he was making. That I think we should not focus too much on that.
I think we'll make a note of what he said, and we'll take on the next question. Doctor, thank you, Ambassador, for your observation.
Our next question is from Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. Ambassador, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
I think he's dropped off. Could we perhaps just get Admiral Muradharan? I think he also wanted to present a question.
Yes. So please proceed.
Yeah. Thank you. So happy to see such eminent panelists, old colleagues talking, and lots of them talking about the Navy. Now, my point is, while we concentrate on the land area, should we not put pressure on China and his way of thinking by more and more of our maritime deployments in the South China Sea? And of course, at the choke points, we are putting our forces. But the moment we have more forces operating in the South China Sea, and like China is trying to build up bases, should we not think of having more arrangements? I would not even call it bases, more arrangements for turnaround and facilities, say in Vietnam and other areas in South China Sea, knowing that we could interact, we could tackle them there or put pressure on them. I would like the views of the panelists on this aspect.
So the question basically pertains to two important points. One is to have pressure on China in the maritime domain in South China Sea, as also build up bases in areas that we consider appropriate to build that pressure. I say Marshal Anil Khosla, you can begin with you. Anil, are you with us?
I'm here. So can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So very valid points made by Admiral. Like I was saying, I have a theory of pressure cooker theory. So what China does is, and he's very rightly shown it this time, that he puts various hotspots he creates. Whatever the reason, we'll not go into. There are 7-8 reasons which was promulgated this time when Wuhan virus was going on. So these situations he creates and then tries to control the pressure by whatever means so that it does not go out of control. Having said that, like similar way, one of the areas is like in case he's putting us pressure in the Himalayan region, like Admiral brought out, that we increase the pressure in the sea area. Fine, that is one of the options available. But as far as the question of two issues which Admiral brought out, one is why don't we operate in the South China Sea, and second is support, like he is having support infrastructure and bases here. Yes, we are going into a lot of agreements with various countries for support, and I'll not go into details, and our port calls also are there. I think Admiral will know better. So we are making those agreements. The second is, as far as operating there is concerned, I think when we make our priority list of all the 3 services as well as Navy itself, I think it is all question of assets, availability of assets and conventional strength, whether we can ability at the moment to go and operate far away from bases from homeland or not. That is a question. So I think in case we economically keep progressing and with economic progress, the military strength also increases, maybe we'll be able to go and operate from far away. But at the moment, due to our resources, I think we have certain amount of limitation where we need to be closer to base rather than going away from the mainlands. Thank you, sir.
In my view, I would say, in addition to what the Marshal has said, is that over the last 7 decades, we actually have not been able to resolve a boundary conflict, or there is any chance of it getting resolved in the near future, as I see. One of the reasons why China would not like to resolve it, to ensure that India remains embroiled in the continental land dispute in the north with China and with Pakistan on the west along the line of control. But the major weakness of China, actually, as the speaker brought out, lies in the maritime domain, particularly in the Indian Ocean, so that India does not really focus. And it was brought out by the speakers also that we need to consider our maritime strengths. Our geostrategic location jetting into the Indian Ocean is our strength by virtue of our geostrategic location. Therefore, this should be one of the considerations that we need to look at. But as the Air Marshal also brought out, that we need to look at our capabilities today as to how far can we operate currently. With the improvement in our comprehensive national strength, sustained economic growth, as also strength in our military and the Navy, I'm sure we will be looking to areas beyond. So I suppose the thought process is right, and we should be looking at our strength, which is the maritime domain. If any other panelists would like to add something? Praveen Bakshi?
So if I may,
yeah, please.
I'd just like to give a slightly alternate view to this. Firstly, I'm not questioning that we need a stronger maritime domain force projection capability, not at all. The moot point is the other countries who are propagating this idea, freedom of passage, freedom of navigation, are operating far away from their own shores. So would we also be operating from our own shores. But there is one subtle difference. We have an LC to take care of. China is closer to our hearts, closer to our solar plexus than it is for them. I do not, and I cannot visualize any one of those major democracies or like-minded rule order-based countries coming to our help in the Himalayas. So unless we first ensure that, if that is adequate, I agree with the art of maneuver that catch the dragon far away from your shores so that he cannot threaten you. But are we in a capability, do we have a capability to do that? Whilst in the maritime domain, we can work as a coalition, I'm afraid boots on ground, no coalition is going to work in the Himalayas. So we've got to balance the two out. By all means, go to South China Sea. By all means, strengthen Andaman Nicobar. Of course, we must strengthen. Where is the doubt? It's an extension of our border areas, of our coastline, of our EEZ. But operating further away to circumscribe China, by all means. But I think the pressing need today, where we are, is closer home. So we got to balance out our resources and capabilities, and the meager budget allocations which are there, I leave it to the planners. And hence I stated that we need an overarching, at the apex level, a security architecture which factors in all these and comes out with workable solutions. Thank you.
Can I make one brief point, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So, sir, I think nobody is doubting the fact that we need greater maritime capability, and the fact that this ability, can pressurize China in a crisis, because 80% of its oil trade, etc., flows through the Indian Ocean. I think we should also be conscious about limitations of how much pressure you can put in the maritime domain if there is an incident along the LAC. I mean, we've had a 10-month standoff. Now it's continuing. So we've had almost a 1-year standoff at Ladakh. You had 100,000 soldiers facing each other. There has been a fair amount of violence that has happened. I mean, what could we have done in the maritime domain to ease pressure here? And if we could have, why didn't we do it? So I think there are limitations, and we sometimes we overstate that if there is something happening along the northern borders, we'll do something in the maritime sphere, and the pressure will be eased off. To me, the classic example is just what is happening or what has happened in the last 1 year. I mean, why is it that we didn't put pressure in the maritime domain? Because I think there are limitations to what you can do. That's just a brief point that I want to make, sir.
So it's basically a point about the capabilities that we actually have. So therefore, we need to really draw a correct balance between the capabilities and to look after our interests on the northern borders. That there is no doubt, because that is the territorial integrity and sovereignty which is involved. So we have to remain focused. But the fact is, as we develop capabilities, we must keep the concept alive. And that, I suppose, in fact, if you look at it in smaller ways, we actually have had the Navy doing those kind of roles when required, not against China, but other countries whenever required. So I suppose it's more a function of capability that we need to develop times to come. Yeah. Can we have the next question, Dr. Nair?
So we have Ambassador Yogendra Kumar who has raised his hands, and then it could be followed by Ambassador Suresh Goel. Ambassador Kumar?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one question, considering the fact that it might involve some sensitive issues. I mean, we have a very distinguished panel. And my question actually is that the negotiating mechanism that we had this time over the LAC, withdrawal of forces, that sort of thing, where we had senior military officers as well as our diplomats there. Is this a better negotiating mechanism than the earlier one, like General Bakshi handled the Doklam crisis, when actually there was no combined kind of negotiating team on the ground, so to say, for let's say to ease the standoff? Thank you.
Yeah, so we have two army commanders here on the Eastern Command as also Northern Command, and both of them have been looking at this particular issue. Shall we have first General Hooda? Could you please take this?
So, sir, my short answer is absolutely it is better, because in any incident, I mean, I handled the tumor incident of 2014, and obviously there is huge diplomatic inputs that go into decision making, that go into negotiation. Even when you're negotiating on ground, with the PLA senior officers, there is always the foreign policy inputs, the diplomatic input that goes into it. And if you have a combined military and Indian Foreign Service team, I think they can bring in greater elements of national policy to, and maybe even taking decisions becomes a little easier. Small decisions. Otherwise, every small decision used to be that, okay, we will get back to you on this, and so you can't take a decision on it. So, in short, I think it's a much better mechanism.
General Praveen Bakshi, you want to say something?
I endorse what General Hooda is saying, and since Ambassador Yogendra Kumar, our instructor in NDC, thank you for the question, sir. In Doklam, he rightly points out, I did not have much access to diplomatic insights into the issues. I acted given a free hand. I went force on force, but I did my own maneuvering in a manner which would keep us at which would leave the initiative in our hand, and I'll leave it at that. But I would have really welcomed, co-joint diplomatic synergy at the field army level, rather than only leaving it at Delhi or at Beijing, for sure. But there is a doubt which has crept into my mind. Why did China so easily acquiesce to this mode of negotiations? Was it buying time? Whose initiative was it? Was it our demand? Or did China mention that let's have the military commanders first and then the diplomats came in a little later? Initially, they insisted on military to military. And was it a stalling tactic? I think more needs to be analyzed as to why and who did it. But going back to the basic question, I think military diplomacy gets reinforced, and decision-making at the national level gets reinforced when the uniform fraternity joins hands with the diplomats.
So the answers are quite clear. That will be good to have a combined effort of the military as well as the diplomatic persons. But I have just been hearing from some of the people who have been involved in this that we have actually faced difficulty in negotiation on legal issues. On a number of issues, I was told that they come out with the historical legal claims of various areas and various times to prove their point. That is one area I believe that we actually did not have on our side to really be able to bring out those issues pertaining to legal claims or based on historical claims. Maybe there's a requirement for us to also have experts who would be able to answer those queries which are being raised by them. Second issue about the diplomatic, the Joint Secretary who actually joined, I would say that he is flying from zero altitude to attend a meeting. This is something that we need to consider because the altitude at which these meetings, particularly in Moldo or Shul, are being held is in excess of 14,000 feet. And the diplomat is going to the second stage of acclimatization in the very first go. I would recommend that when such kind of meetings take place, it would be a good idea for the diplomat to also be located to acclimatize himself purely from his health safety point of view, so that they actually find themselves more comfortable to be negotiating. So in my view, I'm just told that the legal and historical arguments also are very important to be brought in, and we need to bring in experts either to brief or be also present over there. Ambassador Yogendra, I hope we have been able to answer that. And can we move on to the next question?
Unfortunately, we are running short of time, so maybe we could take one question from Ambassador Goel.
Thank you very much. I'll be very, very brief, really, because I think most of the questions have already been put. My question simply is this. Firstly, my sense is that the talks on the LAC, the withdrawal of the Chinese, have come to a practical stagnancy, really. And where the Chinese know that we have no more leverages to make them withdraw beyond what they have already done. Is that correct? And if so, then what actually are we trying for anymore? And number two, linked to that really, is what is to prevent the Chinese again taking us by surprise and not repeat what they did in Galwan in some other sector or the same place, take us by surprise, do the same thing, and again basically show us that our deterrence has no meaning because we are not able to read the Chinese. So my sense is that really we keep on playing into the Chinese hands over and over again without realizing that their game is very different just from the LAC. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there are two questions really speaking about the stagnancy that we have reached. Are we in any position to now negotiate anything that we want to do now? And second is that there are a number of occasions on which we have got surprised. Are there any more chances of that kind? So shall we have first then Praveen Bakshi? Would you like to say something?
Thank you, sir, and thank you for the question. I can't help but notice that the ambassadors or the ex-ambassadors and the diplomats have been most active on this platform, which is a good thing. I have the highest regard for them. Now, regarding the question you asked, sir, my personal belief is China man is not 10 feet tall. There is nothing to fear from him. Yes, he is technologically vastly advanced. He has military superiority. He has economic heft. He has a $200 billion defense spending, which is in public domain. We don't know how much there is. He manufactures and exports weapons and equipment. He's vastly ahead in cyber warfare, etc., etc., etc. Having said that, my experiences showed that after the bravado and flamboyance post-1962, there has been a perceptible reticence in his stance, especially in the Northeast, where when earlier he used to be sitting back in 3- and 4-story centrally heated 4-story buildings and his camps were tactically not sighted, gradually he is coming up and deploying. Why is he doing that? Is there a vulnerability we are reading in that? Why is he deploying forward, putting up defenses, whether it's on our extremities, whether it's on the Doklam Plateau, which to my mind is actually optics. It has no tactical significance. But for some strange reason, our media and learned journalists and defense analysts have said, oh my God, he's come and deployed on the Doklam or Dolam plateau. So what? That's optics. And that's exactly what messaging he's sending. That's the gray zone conflict I was talking about. If the heft was there, why did he not push ahead in Doklam? Were we surprised? Was he surprised? I leave it open to you, strategically surprised. Eastern Ladakh, simply, I think he crossed a red line, thinking that our red line was further off. So, to my mind, and it's a game and gray zone conflict, which I said we are firmly in the midst of it. We never recognized it. In the gray zone conflict, it's a long haul, and you transform, you reorientate yourself, you invent yourself, your doctrine, strategies. There is no question of giving up. It's a persistent incremental conflict, and that's exactly what we are in. So the sooner we recognize it, and no quick fix answers. Thank you.
Yeah, Marshal Anil, would you like to speak about the surprise part?
Yes, sir. Just 2 points I would like to make. One, I already said that now that trust has been totally broken and we need not get into complacency. We need to keep a watch out. As I said in my talk, that one is we need to enhance our ISR capability in a big way, and especially space-based ISR is the way to go. And secondly, we need to have a plan where we need to review and see which are the areas and which are the timings and all those things. Having said that, sir, I fully agree with General Bakshi on one count. China does two things. One is purely for display, like he said. In Doklam also, we noticed from the air point of view also, whenever there is a meeting, there is a discussion likely to take place, he will bring his S6 bombers. And open, it will be in the open. It's not a tactical deployment. There are 25 fighters lined up on the tarmac. I mean, which Air Force will be fool enough to line up 25 aircraft, wingspan to wingspan, wingtip to wingtip on the tarmac? So these are all for show. Even the ISR things which we saw, the buildings which he is making for his troops for further deployment, for forward deployment, two-story building. Who makes a two-story building near the border? I mean, with an artillery range. I mean, these are all his ways of, showing off his muscle power and not getting involved with the actual conflict. And at the moment, his weakness is basically one is related to basically HR, training and tactics, where we have advantage over him at the moment, but he is trying to rectify these also at a rapid pace. So we need to also move ahead in terms of technology and in terms of capability building so that our gap doesn't increase between the two countries. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think I'll just make a mention that as he mentioned, the ISR capability has already been brought out by every speaker, that's one area that we need to do. A point was made about stagnancy and why did he not move forward, including at Doklam or in Eastern Ladakh. Please try and understand that we are looking at an extremely difficult terrain. Technology superiority alone cannot help in those kind of terrains where you have boots on the ground. And also the fact that in case China did anything extra and did not achieve any decisive results, it would be a great loss of face. And in case we did something counter, it would be much greater loss of face. In those kind of terrains, technology alone cannot really help. GDP differential, as the Global Times has been giving, that there's a 5-time GDP differential. GDP differential do not give the outcomes of wars or conflicts. Therefore, I think we need to understand in those kind of terrains, it's very difficult for someone to move ahead as he will not get any decisive results. I think Dr. Nair was saying that we are short of time. Hooda, do you want to really say anything?
So I think we can take up a couple of questions from the chat box since we have an active chat box.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, so I'll just read out a couple of questions from the chat box.
Yeah.
There is a question from Professor Hemant Adlakha. It seems regarding the LAC, our basic approach has been to look for strategic options to take on China or the PLA. But the question is, without first grasping clearly how India and China have landed up in this situation, how are we to even strategize or take preventive measures? How sure are we that the dust up in Galvan Valley was an extension of China's growing aggressiveness in Asia, or for that matter, the standoff in Doklam? Please comment. Then there's a question by Commodore Ranjit Rai. Could the generals have defended the LAC and the LOC comment on the Home Minister's statement of 5th August 2019 of taking Aksai Chin and POK? And does that get discussed as analysts state that led China's PLA to act in deterrence?
Yeah, General Hooda, would you like
anyone?
General Hooda, would you like to take the LAC question that was raised about the strategic options?
Yeah, so I don't know why there is this sort of doubt that we are not aware of why China is doing what it is doing. I mean, we are clear that at least in Asia, there is a long-term strategic rivalry with China. We are aware that their actions on the LAC are meant to pressurize India. We are aware of the reasons why they do not want an LAC delineation, as General Ahluwalia has also brought out. That the reason why they are not doing a LAC delineation is to keep pressure on India, to keep it sort of occupied on the continental domain. So I think there is a reasonable amount of clarity. If there was any doubt, it was whether we would be able to handle China diplomatically, economically, politically, and keep peace on the LAC. And that it wouldn't cross the military threshold. I think that notion has sort of got disabused. And now we've discussed today as to what kind of strategy we need to deal with China, what sort of capability building we need to do. Those are areas that that we should focus on. So that's my comments.
There one more question about the LAC and the LOC, Aksai Chin and POK. General Praveen Bakshi.
I think we should leave political rhetoric aside and military strategy aside. Yeah.
The answer is very obvious to even the person who's asking the question. You may wish something, but you must have the capabilities, and you must have worked towards building up those capabilities. I'm afraid in the current context, it's a wee bit far-fetched. As we move along, give another 15, 20, 25 years, but then given the already our disparity, it's a tough call. It's really a tough call. Nothing which is never said no, but fine, the parliament a statement was made and we stay by that thing. We've not done it to POK. Where are we talking about Aksai Chin? So we got to be realists also. And eventually what is the political aim and objective has to be clearly articulated in closed doors with the people who will implement those, who are the levers, who are the means to achieve that end. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think they're very well brought out by General Praveen Bakshi. Also to understand that in addition to having a decisive edge, priority to get a decisive result, that is one aspect. Second, in order to go to a particular area like POK, you require a popular support. People should be with you. Third aspect, in the case of POK, you have to understand is that you have now one more animal in the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, in which China has built a number of strategic assets in the area of Gilgit-Baltistan. And therefore, you have one more security element which is operating in the Gilgit-Baltistan region. Therefore, there are three important factors, I would say. One, General Bakshi brought out, is you need to have the capability. In fact, I would say you require decisive superiority to do anything which is not there. And second is that you require a popular support. Three, you have to understand that there is one more element now, and that is the CPEC, which is a $62 billion project which is taking place. And there are not many strategic assets have been built in the Gilgit-Baltistan region, in which there would be a great amount of security element also operating in that. So I think we have to consider a larger number of issues rather than having a very simplistic answer to this kind of a question. Can we have the next question, please?
Sir, I'm afraid I think we'll have to conclude.
Is that so? Yeah, I think we have to conclude. First of all, I'm sorry that there was a technical glitch that I could not be part of the initial proceedings. But I do not want to say what the panelists have already spoken. And I do see Mr. Peter Rimele, with whom I've had association here earlier. I want to say that while talking about deterrence, it is a strength that mellows China. So you have to understand that we need to build our military muscle in terms of hard, soft, and demonstrated power. And that's how only those three elements which have been given out. I want to read to you what Professor Lawrence Friedman, who is the professor of war studies and vice principal of King's College London, has to say. He believes that for deterrence to be successful, the threat must be made, the threat must be noticed, and threat must be believed. So therefore, it is important to have all the three: capability, the resolve to take action, and to communicate to the opponent of the red lines and the threshold which we will not allow him to cross, and that we will take action. I am sure one very important point that was brought out was that indigenization is a very important aspect. I can only say that no country has become a global power in case they import 70 to 80% of the defense equipment. Therefore, I think our country is on the right path now to look at Atmanirbhar as also Make in India as one of our prime objectives, so that we do not have so much of a reliance to import our defense equipment. 60 to 70 to 80% is a rather large number, and therefore that must be, I suppose, considered in a big way. I also want to make a point is about when you talk about line of control and LAC, I think number of factors have to be considered. What are the physical parameters, differences between LOC and the LAC? What is the concept? In the case of the line of control, it is the holders are keepers, and that you have eyeball to eyeball deployment along the entire line of control, and that there is a great amount of firing that takes place. I think Jan Praveen Bakshi spoke about a great amount about the gray zone aspects. It's a concept where it is oscillating between war and peace. In fact, with Pakistan, we have been at gray zone since 1989. It has been no war and no peace. In fact, when I was commanding the brigade, it used to be called NWNP, no war, no peace, because we are neither at war nor were we at peace, but every day they used to be firing across the line of control, So that's one important aspect. Also, we have to consider when you talk about LAC becoming LOC, it is a border which is 3,488 kilometers long. It's a very long border. It's not like the LOC, which is just about 740 kilometers or 750 kilometers. So therefore, there's a requirement of additional troops, as also requirement of relief of units and the kind. So I think there's a lot many points actually have been brought out, but the bottom line is that we actually have to look at improving our hard power, the soft power, and the demonstrated power. A great amount of focus has to be on building our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. Also, we have to consider that it is not going to be when the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of a nation is threatened, it is not a military threat alone. We have to look at it as a whole of the government approach, all elements of national power, which actually displayed a very positive role in the conflict at Eastern Ladakh last year. So it is going to be all elements of national power in terms of political, economic, diplomatic, shall I say, trade, investment, also information, technology, and all these aspects actually would be the ones which will actually talk about deterrence that can be provided. We are a huge consumer market, more than 1.3 billion strong. Therefore, economy, any country which gets affected by economy is again a very great deterrence. So this is what I thought should be the point that I'd like to make. If anyone has any other point, you kindly say so. But I would like to thank ICS and CAS, as also all the panelists. You had very experienced panelists who have been on the ground, they have on-ground experience, and they have been able to bring out very large number of diverse issues as they have seen. With that, I'd like to thank each and every one now. Thank you.
I would now like to invite Mr. Peter Romelli for the vote of thanks.
Yes, thank you. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to address you with a vote of thanks, but I would also like to use the opportunity to share some European experience with you. First of all, my thanks is to ICS and especially Ambassador Kanta, whom I'm wishing well, that we managed again together to organize such an interesting event and addressing current problems. Of course, my thanks to the distinguished panelists. You shared your experience, your insight with all the participants, and that is the important thing. That makes such events interesting, and that leads us to a way ahead. And of course, I'd like to thank the participants who were not only from India, but I have seen also from other parts of the world. So they crossed virtually all lines of controls and borders to participate actively in our event today. Now, as in the beginning, our seminar is also called The Way Ahead. So at the very beginning, it was Lieutenant General Hooda who gave a prediction or anticipation what would happen. And he said, basically, he expects greater deployment of troops and greater mistrust. Doesn't sound like the way ahead, doesn't it? Because ahead somehow always has a positive connotation in it. So the way ahead should also be combined somehow looking into the future, what could be done positively. I think all of the speakers agreed, and General Hooda set the tone on that by saying India needs to invest in its infrastructure development, one side, but at the same time to start rebuilding confidence, work on confidence measures. As far as infrastructure is concerned, I think all of you had agreed that the security architecture needs to be put right. Now, what that means, of course, having different groups from air, the oceans, and from the land, you had different ideas of where the priorities would be. So I don't want to have an opinion on that one. All agreed the infrastructure should be right, the security architecture should be right. Priorities you see, but that's to be expected, slightly different. And one of the speakers mentioned, and I agree totally with that, it's not only the infrastructure, you also need to have the economy right to finance the setup of this infrastructure. So that is another important part of it. Looking into the past, I think it was Su Enlai who was the first one using this term of actual line of control. And let me now share a European experience with you. There is not so much historic ballast between India and China on that border. It is a few years, a few decades. Su Enlai sounds long time ago, but still we are looking into the future. Let me take you to the French and German border. 2 world wars were fought at that border. Since Napoleon crossed the Rhine River with his troops, several other wars were in between along the French and the German border. How is it looking now? It is a virtual line, but maybe nobody has really control. Of course, if need be, there is control, but it's an open border. And it has been a border where people were fighting each other for generations, for centuries, and today it is different. So what is something one could learn out of that? I'm not saying this is the way ahead, but I'm saying what could happen if one manages to address those border conflicts and to address those underlying economic reasons also. I'm glad that Air Marshal had also mentioned the water issue. We should look into the major river systems, mostly of them coming from Tibet, and they will be an economic issue in the future. It's not only a line, what is artificially there somewhere, but needs control, but it's also the river issue, and future wars might not be fought for oil, but for water. So this is something to look into it. Let me bring an easy sample at the end. I said the border between France and Germany is more or less non-existent anymore, at least practically not anymore. I once had a delegation from Rwanda, and what they're doing is cross-border planning on issues what are commonly there. It's one natural region, and the border is an artificial line somehow built by history. So I went with this Rwandese delegation to see and meet an institution, an authority, what was doing this cross-border planning for both countries, France and Germany, and they used the former immigration customs building, what was not needed anymore. So I had the bus stop directly, the middle of the bus was on the borderline between France and Germany. And I said, those who want to enter that authority from France, use the front entrance. Those who want to enter from Germany, use the back entrance of the bus. You see how a border, what has led to so many deaths, to so many fatalities over centuries, can in time change to such an easy thing. And maybe that is what I wish in 50, 60, whatever years to happen also at this border between China and India. Thank you very much for participating, and let's have the way ahead and put it with some positive connotations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rumelli, and thank you, distinguished gentlemen, for all your insightful remarks. I would like to thank especially like to thank General V.K. Ahluwalia for joining us and sharing his remarks as chair despite facing technical issues. I'm sure our audience today found the session extremely productive. The recording of the video will be available on the ICS YouTube channel. With this, we come to an end of today's seminar. Looking forward to seeing you all again next week. Thank you for joining us.